evening, ladies and gentlemen. Kate Locanti Alcacer here, and welcome to another episode of Celtic Connections. We are in our series of what it takes to make a play. This series is intended to entertain patrons and theater artists alike by bringing in some of our ICTC family and asking some questions about the process of making a play, what it's like to produce a play at Irish Classical Theatre. And this evening, it is my very excited news to say to you that we have Fortunato Pezzimenti here as our guest. You are very familiar with him by this point, I'm sure. He was our producing director for many, many years and has just retired and is now our associate director. So welcome, Fortunato Pezzimenti. We're happy to have you on again.
Thank you, Kate. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you.
Good, good.
So let's the interview, yes.
Yes, all right. So let's kick off with our first question here. And just to offer some context to the conversation, could you let us know in your own words what a director does?
Well, I can tell you what I do.
Okay.
I mean, the first thing you have to do is really get an impression of the play. And so, and it's funny because I have to be in a state of mind to actually receive the play. So I have to give myself space where I relax. I'm going to sit down with the play and not be bothered and just take some notes in my first impressions of the play. So that is always, I think, the first way to go to see what your intuitive responses are, because often those are very genuine, that maybe later be tainted by the rational mind that comes into play. So those early reactions, I'm sure you're aware of that also, that those early reactions are important. And then I think you have to have a passion for the piece. And if you find, you're lukewarm about the piece, well, then maybe you got to find a trigger in it that excites you. Because I think, any creative act, you have to have your passion for it. And also how you're going to make it personal. I think those are, that goes for actors also. So, in this
Absolutely.
World. Finding your passion and also how you relate to it personally. Because at the end of the day, it's you and the actors who have to come up with this particular creation. And so that passion is important. I always think about the word, sometimes in my career, I've been told, oh, you're very enthusiastic. And now I have the argument that enthusiasm, the derivation of that, means to be filled with God. So I will take that. But
I love it.
That's important for an actor to have, or a director to have that as you go into the piece. Once you do that, I think I'll put the casting thing aside for now, is that try to determine, okay, how is the best way to handle this play in rehearsal? Because every play presents a different question. So I will look at the play and say, and I always go back to Bill Ball's book, A Sense of Direction, because he talks about finding what's the dominant feature of a play, and it can either be plot or it could be character, theme, language, or spectacle. And so I try to figure out, so where does this land, in the scheme of things, so that you don't clutter play with too many of those elements. So if you have, you're dealing with a character play, and then all of a sudden you're adding a lot of spectacle to it, you may get a confused product at the end. The one exception, the couple of exceptions I would say about that is Shakespeare, where you have all of those elements often in a play because he is, so brilliant. The next thing, so then I break it down and figure out, okay, what is this? And then I go on to thinking, all right, what question does the play ask? Can I boil that down into a statement and perhaps come up maybe with the metaphor, for the play? And then I will look at the play from a viewpoint. Because often we tend to look at plays, I would say myself, and we focus on our strengths. You know, I feel this about this, or I have a really good visual sense about this, or I have a really good sense of what the storyline is. But when you look at viewpoints, and you're aware of the viewpoints, how you read a play from a different perspective, it forces you sometimes to go into territory that you're not that familiar with, and forced to, oh yeah, I gotta think about that element of it, you know, that element of the play. So the viewpoints vary. I mean, I start with the story viewpoint, which is basically a synopsis. Then I write it out, and I find that or type it out if I'm doing a computer. Right now I'm working on CMARCs, and I'm actually writing out the storyline. And I find that that helps with inspiration as you're writing. It slows you down, and it allows you to discover in a way that just reading it might not. So I'll start with, let's say, a story viewpoint, and then I'll look at the play from each of the characters' points of view. And then then I'll look at the play, for example, with CMARS. I'll go from the time perspective, because when you look at the play, a week here, a week there, a week there, but then the author, you know, eventually says a year has passed. But in those moments, you want to figure out, well, where am I from the time viewpoint? And from there, you know, you can go through, read it from the logic viewpoint, read it from the costume, the set design viewpoint. So that by the time you are done with all that, you have a definite feel for what the play is about and how to begin it. And as you start to read from, say, points of view of the characters, you start to feel the different beats, the different emotional changes. That's another viewpoint. I'll read the story from the emotional viewpoint. In fact, sometimes you can track it. Right. You know, how in this scene here, it moves in this direction. And then you can see where you hit your maximum points, because you certainly don't want to give it all away too soon early in the play, especially if relating to an emotional outburst. But Mary Overly, who was the founder of the early structure of viewpoints, said, you know, we as theater people often don't have a structure as directors to guide us along. She says, after all, if you were an architect, you would have to know how to build a load-bearing wall before you even begin to do that. And so she literally, from what I know, went away while I worked with her just that one summer, a few weeks. She literally went away for 7 years. She felt like she had no structure. What was she doing and questioning all that? So that's where she comes up with the structure. So this gives you, okay, I'm going to approach this with some kind of structure and see where it leads me. So for example, you know, with Midsummer Night's Dream, my approach to that would be very different from CMARC's.
Oh yeah.
Which is a different piece. Although there may be elements of some of that physicality that you bring into a rehearsal. If you see that you have a certain issue, you say, well, that old thing might work here. So it's all about, you know, your toolbox. And if you're ready to pull it out when you see there's an issue here, or think about something that may be a problem, you come back the next day, oh, let's try this.
Right, right. And you're working on CMARCs in preparation, and by the time viewers will see this episode, you will be in rehearsals. We also have Tom McCarr, who is our resident sound designer, and he will be talking about his process. And also we have Chris Kelly and Kristen Tripp Kelly, who are starring in CMARCs. And so this episode, these series, even though we are looking at how to make a play, it is our team from CMARC. So that's like an interesting way to look at this information. And now we're moving into a digital production that will happen at the Andrews. You have directed at the Andrews so many times. What to you is so unique about directing at the Andrews Theater?
For me, I just love the three-dimensional, if that's the right dimension, the three, or is it 4 dimensions? The three-dimensional aspect of it, that gives you a certain depth of field and all. And I have to say, starting with the old Calumet, eventually I think we got used to how to use the space. It took some getting used to, certainly. And the big challenge is to make sure that within the space you find the moments which are organic to allow people to move in a way that seems natural and fitting to the dialogue and the situation. Certainly, because certainly you don't want someone standing in front of somebody in the first row with their back to them for any more than maybe 10 seconds or so.
Right,
it's hard to find that. And well, we worked on After Miss Julie. And I remember thinking about After Miss Julie, we can't do this in the round. You had that tremendous speech on that table. And I thought, if I had to worry about moving you in this case around the space, and find the organic places, it seemed like it would have been so artificial.
Yeah. It's really a dance between director and actor and the space, the three entities, really making sure that connection is there. We also worked on Outside Mullengar, which was such a wonderful experience. And I remember there was quite a long scene between Pat Multane and myself, and we were sitting at a table, and the three of us talked about it for a long time. Should we get up from the table? Like, it doesn't feel organic to get up from the table. And we ended up doing that entire scene at the table. We would maybe shift a little bit here and there, but we agreed that the language of that moment would carry the audience through. They wouldn't be too worried about us needing to shift. So it depends on the play. It depends on the moment in the play, and each play is different. So
absolutely. I remember, Kate, directing way back when at the Packet Inn, was it Dinner Theater? Neil Simon play. And back when I was just starting out as a director, I had everything worked out, on the script and my columns and all that. So there was I forget the name of the play, chapter 2. There is about a 2-page monologue that Leo, I believe, is the name. And I had, it was basically a proscenium march. And I had this all worked out, that the actor Leo would get up, go here, cross here, go up to the couch, come back to the corner, sit down. After all of that, I said, you never have to get up. It's just, so for the 2 pages, he just sat there, and what was more important was the story he was telling, rather than the movement.
And you don't know that until you get into the space and start working together and getting up on your feet and having that relationship between actor and director really working through each moment. That's what's so, I think that alchemy is so interesting and exciting. Our patrons may not maybe always know that side of it, that the hours that we spend in rehearsal trying and retrying, and that's what's really exciting. And I think in the space at the Andrews, we are really responsible to take the audience by the hand and lead them through the story, like in any production. But at the Andrews, because of the intimacy of the space, there's a real necessity to make sure that the audience is engaged the entire time. You have done so many productions. I've got one more question for you. You've got done so many productions at the Andrews. Do you have a favorite, and why?
All right. I thought about this as I saw that question. Can I name a favorite musical, comedy, and drama?
For all of yours, yes, of course you can.
Right. So my favorite musical that I directed, and when I first started directing, that's what I did a lot of years ago for musicals, come to speak of that, was Next to Normal. That piece, to take bipolar issues and turn that into a powerful message, it was phenomenal. Did you happen to see that one, or was that?
I was actually out of town then, but I remember how much the Buffalo audiences loved it.
Right, it was a remarkable piece. So that, let's see, comedy, I would have to say The Servant of Two Masters.
Oh yeah, it was a great one.
With Brian Mislivy, it's just so madcap crazy with jumping and throwing up plates. And I remember Chris Standard practicing hours trying to toss, plates. So that was fantastic. And as a drama, Miss Judy, I think that play presented such challenges, difficult to get right.
Yes.
And with you and Chris Evans
and
little Pooh, yeah, and Giraldi. I mean, she won an award, didn't she? You got the Catherine for that. And it was nominated, which it was wonderful for that kind of production to have that kind of impact. But I thought it was a set design, costumes, the whole thing. Yeah, we worked through that moment when.
Oh yeah, if somebody asked me what my favorite production was at Irish, I would say After Miss Julie as well. So we share that. It was such a magical, special. Those come around so once in a lifetime, where you have that connection to something, and I feel the same. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Fortune. It's wonderful to get to chat with you, and thank you for sharing your vast knowledge on the directing process and a little bit of the tricks of the trade of working at the Andrews. We hope to be back there sooner than later, but for now, let's hope. But for now, continue to tune in to Celtic Connection.
I want to thank your audience out there for the continued support of the company. It's going to be so important as we move forward.
That's right. Thank you, everyone, for continuing to tune in, and we hope that you will join us Friday after Friday. And we will continue to highlight our artists from C-Marks now that we're in rehearsals and moving forward with the production. So thank you so much. Tune in next week, same Irish time, same Irish channel. Thanks all.
Bye all.